Australia. On the evening of 14th of December 2025, a peaceful public gathering at Bondi Beach, a Hanukkah event that drew hundreds of people, was shattered by a deliberate, targeted attack that resulted in multiple fatalities and scores of injuries. What began as a celebration became one of the deadliest acts of violence on Australian soil in decades. Several members of the Jewish community, bystanders, and emergency responders were killed or seriously wounded, while a swift but harrowing response by police, emergency services, and members of the public confronted the assailants and attempted to bring the attack to an end. The nation and communities around the world have been left grieving, mad, shocked, and demanding answers about motive, responsibility, and how such an attack could occur on a public beachfront during a holiday gathering. Reuters. Summary of known facts. At least 15 people were reported killed and many more wounded during the attack, with some media and official tallies later indicating the death toll rose as authorities continued to process the scene and hospitals treated the injured. Among the dead were individuals spanning a wide age range, including children and older adults. Victims included community leaders and families who had come to celebrate together. One of the suspected assailants was killed at the scene, while the other was critically wounded and in custody or under hospital guard as investigations continued. Hospitals in Sydney received dozens of casualties. Some were in a serious condition. Authorities declared the incident a terrorist act and have treated the attack as motivated by hatred directed at the Jewish community present that evening. Reuters. Sequence of events, chronology as reported. According to witness accounts and official reporting, the attack unfolded in the early evening as the Chanukah event was underway near the promenade and playground area. Loud gunfire erupted, sending thousands of attendees and beachgoers fleeing for cover. Videos circulating on social media captured chaotic scenes of people running, injured attendees receiving first aid on the sand, and officers and bystanders attempting to disarm or detain the suspects. Emergency services, including NSW police, ambulance, and fire crews, arrived quickly and established a cordon, treated victims on site, and transported the critically injured to multiple hospitals across the city. Police subsequently searched properties connected to the suspects and undertook counterterrorism procedures, including bomb squad investigations of suspicious items. ABC. Suspects and motive. Investigations by state and federal authorities identified two male suspects believed to have carried out the attack. Reporting indicates the suspects were a father and son duo. Early media accounts and police briefings have suggested at least one of the suspects legally owned multiple firearms that were recovered by investigators. Officials and political leaders characterized the assault as a targeted anti-Jewish terror attack, noting signs that the gathering itself was the intended focus. Intelligence and law enforcement agencies said they were examining the suspects' backgrounds, prior contacts with security services, and any potential radicalization pathways or affiliations. Authorities emphasized the need to determine whether failures in the firearms licensing system, information sharing gaps, or other institutional issues contributed to the attacker's access to weapons and the capacity to carry out this crime. The Guardian. Official responses. Australia's Prime Minister and other senior national and state leaders condemned the attack in the strongest terms, describing it as an appalling act of terror and hatred. Federal and state officials signaled immediate reviews of security for Jewish and other minority community events, and the National Cabinet convened to consider stronger measures on firearm regulation and public safety. International leaders expressed condolences and some elevated protective measures at Jewish community events abroad. Local religious and community leaders called for unity and calm, while also urging an honest national conversation about anti-Semitism, violent extremism, and how to keep vulnerable communities safe. Law enforcement spokespeople reassured the public that extensive investigative resources had been mobilized, including counterterrorism units and specialist crime teams. Reuters' human impact and community response. The human cost of the attack is profound. Families have lost loved ones. Survivors and witnesses carry both physical injuries and psychological trauma. Entire congregations and neighborhoods are grieving. Synagogues, community centers, and local leaders offered immediate support, while emergency hotlines and trauma counseling services were made available for victims and witnesses. Spontaneous memorials and vigils sprung up in public spaces around Bondi and across Sydney, with citizens leaving flowers and messages of solidarity. At the same time, there have been troubling reports of retaliatory hate incidents, including desecration of Muslim burial sites and online threats, underscoring the risk that one act of targeted violence can inflame tensions and spread harm beyond the initial victims. Community leaders from across faiths publicly appealed for calm and mutual protection, while law enforcement pursued perpetrators and evidence. News.com.au, law enforcement, investigation, and evidence gathering. Police operations at the scene and at properties linked to the suspects involved thorough searches, forensic collection, and the seizure of firearms, electronic devices, and other materials potentially relevant to motive and planning. Federal security agencies said they were examining past intelligence files and any prior investigations to establish whether the attack could have been prevented or whether warning signs were missed. Where explosive devices or suspicious items were reported, bomb squads and explosive specialists were deployed. Authorities have asked anyone with video or photographic evidence of the incident to provide it to investigators to aid reconstruction of the events. Prosecutors, in collaboration with counterterrorism units, will face the task of building a legally robust case that establishes the sequence of conduct, responsibility, and, if applicable, the terrorist intent of the perpetrators. Reuters. Policy implications and public debate. The attack immediately prompted a debate about gun policy, licensing, and enforcement in Australia. Historically, Australia has had strict firearm laws enacted after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. Yet media and political commentators noted that legally held firearms were implicated in this incident and that a national review of licensing, storage, and vetting processes would be required. Political leaders committed to urgent discussion at federal, provincial, state levels about whether laws should be amended, whether enforcement needs bolstering, and how to better detect and intervene where individuals show signs of radicalization or intent to commit mass violence. The attack also reignited conversations about online radicalization, community cohesion, the rise of anti-Semitism in many countries since 2023, and the role that governments, civil society, and social media platforms should play in prevention. Reuters. International reactions. Internationally, the shooting provoked swift condemnation, expressions of solidarity, and, in some places, heightened security around Jewish institutions and public events. Leaders from allied nations offered condolences and promised cooperation on intelligence and counterterrorism assistance where appropriate. The attack also reverberated in diplomatic channels and public discourse, with some foreign leaders highlighting the incident as evidence of the global spread of anti-Semitic violence and the need for coordinated responses to transnational extremist influences. PBS. Ethical and social considerations. Beyond immediate security responses, the incident raises complex ethical and social questions. How should societies balance civil liberties with enhanced surveillance or preventive detention powers? What safeguards are necessary to ensure that measures intended to protect vulnerable communities do not stigmatize entire faith groups or ethnicities? How can governments improve early intervention programs for individuals at risk of radicalization while protecting privacy and due process? Community leaders emphasize that solidarity across faiths and communities is essential, and that efforts to tackle prejudice must include long-term educational and social programs to counter hatred and exclusion. ALG's next steps and priorities. In the immediate term, priorities include 1. Completing the forensic investigation and supporting the legal process. 2.